Good evening and welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, a series of conversations with startup founders and the investors that fund them. I'm Chris Gill, CEO of SVForum, the largest organization in Silicon Valley serving technologists and entrepreneurs. Tonight we're doing something a little bit different and very pleased to have with us Cliff Hurst, who is an entrepreneurial anthropologist. So Cliff, thank you for coming along.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Chris.
Not at all. Now, we first met a couple of years ago, and if we go back even further than that, I know you were an officer in the Marines. How did you go from that to being an entrepreneurial anthropologist?
Well, it was a long journey, but I left the Marine Corps to be in small business, and have now been self-employed for over 20 years. At midlife, I decided to pursue a dissertation to explore one of my real passions, and that is what makes humans tick. Mm-hmm. And midway through that study, I moved out here to Silicon Valley with my wife, and a career move for her, and jumped both feet into this world of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship. And I find the people and the ecosystem just fascinating. So I've decided to do my dissertation on what makes these entrepreneurs tick.
Okay, now when you say a dissertation, that means you're doing a PhD course?
That's correct. I'm about to finish. I'm that close.
Okay. And we first met when you approached me to see if I could introduce you to groups of entrepreneurs that you could study in the wild, as it were.
That's right. And you did that, and I appreciate it. And they've been the focus of my research for the past year and a half.
Okay.
And this is kind of the debut of my findings.
Okay, so you've now assembled all this research. You've looked at it in great detail, and you've started to uncover stuff, some stuff that you expected and some mm-hmm. stuff that you didn't. So, did you uncover anything about some of the myths of Silicon Valley?
Well, sure. Being someone who's from the outside, the press around who's a successful entrepreneur usually focuses on 20-somethings.
Right.
The idea is you have to drop out of college, be 22 years old, and start something in your garage.
Right.
To become a successful entrepreneur. And I didn't sort for this, but in the people I met who were involved in your programs, I found something quite different. In fact, in my qualitative sample here, the average age of entrepreneurs planning to start their business here is 39. They've got 12 to 14 years of business experience and are very well educated. In a sample of 13, there are 11 master's degrees and 3 PhDs.
So this is hugely different from the idea that you drop out of college at 20 or 21 and you suddenly become either Microsoft or Facebook.
That's right.
Okay, can you tell a little bit more about the types of people that you met?
Well, one reason I decided to focus on entrepreneurs is that they're fascinating, energized, engaged, and very passionate about what they're doing. Mm-hmm. As a consultant, I've worked most of my life in larger organizations in consulting and leadership development and stuff, and there's not that much energy or passion in large corporations that I see here in the eyes of the people who are trying to start something that's important to them.
Okay. Now, when you were starting to look at the entrepreneurs and study them in their wild, natural mm-hmm. habitats out there, did you have a theory or some particular area that you were focusing on?
Yes, I did. And even before I began my doctoral studies, I was an ardent student of a theory of human judgment. And that's guided my search, because as I began to explore, especially these entrepreneurs who are seeking to start a business that's scalable. Mm-hmm. By definition, that means they're going to need somebody else's money to help it succeed. Mm-hmm. So they're looking for angel or venture capital investment. Mm-hmm. So that became my target, and that's the people I think you appeal to in your organization, to help them craft a business plan that lets them do that more successfully.
Yeah, that's a very big part of it.
Yeah. So as I looked at them, I realized that nobody lives in a fishbowl. As much as an entrepreneur who's seeking investor funding. They're looking at you at all sides. Right. You're trying to recruit team members who are looking in the eye and say, is this someone whose vision I can buy into? Is this someone who can lead me to the success I want? Mm-hmm. You're trying to get early customers, and they're saying, can you really deliver on that promise? And you're pitching yourself to investors who are scrutinizing everything about your business, including you, the entrepreneur, the founder of that company, and what's your character? What's your judgment? If I invest in your company, I'm really investing in you. And I've come to the conclusion that the founder's judgment is probably the strongest asset that any startup has. So I've been exploring entrepreneurial judgment for that reason.
Okay, so the first thing that you shared with me when we looked at this in some detail a couple of weeks ago was the value of work, and you found there were some dissimilarities that you didn't expect there. Can you tell me a little bit about that and explain what that would mean?
Well, to set up a research project, you need an independent and a dependent variable.
Okay.
So let's say my independent variable is this judgment assessment, which is in-depth and detailed around a lot of the aspects of judgment that is important to investors. The speed of decision making, your flexibility, your perseverance, your candor, your ability to notice what's going on in the environment. These can all be assessed. And yet I needed some way to say what's different in my sample. So as I began interviewing people, I began watching them deliver their pitches as part of their graduation from your programs, as part of Launch Silicon Valley, observing their pitches, I began to see the feedback that was being given to them from a lot of directions. And what struck me is that it seems like entrepreneurs were very open, for the most part, to feedback from all these different directions, more open than other people I've worked with. So my faculty committee said, well, Cliff, why don't you dig into that role of feedback a little bit? So as I coded, I transcribed in-depth interviews of an hour and a half length sometimes, and began to code them to say, does this person accepting feedback or reflecting upon it, even if they disagreed? Are they leading it in and digesting it, or are they pushing it off? Are they deflecting it? So I created two dependent variables, reflection or deflection of feedback.
Right.
And then I compared that to their judgment. And I said, can I distinguish the difference? And that's where the answer is, yeah, I could.
Okay.
In some cases.
This is a really important factor, because as most investors will have told you, and I know when you've been on the courses that we run, coachability, the ability for an entrepreneur to take feedback is viewed as a very important factor. So what did you find? I know you've got some
Well, here
slides to show
I
us
found
here.
more than this, but a couple of the highlights that I'd love to share with you. Here's a graph that shows a dimension that we measure called the value of work.
Okay.
And what it assesses is the degree to which work is seen by a person as a valuable, important part of life. And if someone scores strong, which would be on the left side of that graph, they embrace work as an important part of life. Someone who would score very weakly on the right side of that graph may tend to shun it, or maybe trying to get out of work and so forth. So the first thing I found is that these entrepreneurs, as you might expect, score high, and that's this box plot here, shows that on the whole they're above average or well developed in this sense of the meaning of work. But I slice my data apart between those what I've called high deflectors, those who deflect most of the feedback, and low deflectors, those who tend to let most of it in. And there's a difference here. If you look at these red circles, you'll see that my low deflectors, people who take feedback in, tend to be well developed in this dimension of the value of work, where those who deflect it the most are only at average or above average. And that was a statistically significant difference.
Now, there was something else associated with that in their views of solving practical problems.
That's right, and these are related, but there was another measure that looks at the ability of someone to solve a problem without external advice. That is, they can figure out on their own.
Okay.
And that's what we call this dimension. Same scale, the stronger scores are on the left, the weaker scores are on the right. You see the box plot in pink there. On the whole, this group of entrepreneurs are pretty well developed there.
Okay.
But when I separated them between high deflectors and low deflectors, I found a difference, and it's a statistically significant difference.
So there's a difference between people who accept feedback and people who try to push off feedback.
Yeah, and there's an irony here, because the people who need it least accept it the most, and those who need it more don't handle it as well.
So can you expand a little bit on that? Because that seems very contrary. The people who need it least, the people who are best at doing this stuff, will accept the feedback the most. The people who should
need it most yeah,
What won't
they push it back.
they push it back?
Well, I think there are two things going on. I think one is the way they got to be good at it
Yep.
is by listening to feedback. So it's a self-fulfilled reinforcing loop, if you will.
Okay.
And so people who know that they've learned from feedback from others are probably more open to learning than those who haven't caught on yet.
Okay.
Secondly, let me point out that even my high deflectors, or the lowest scores here, are still average and above average. So what we're looking at here is a group of people who pretty much got it together, and are there minor differences. Right. It's not like we have a whole group who are really bad. There's a difference between those who are fairly good at it and really good at it. And that's a hard distinction to make, but I think we're beginning to make it.
Okay. Now there was a further aspect towards this with regard to problem solving, which certainly I hadn't thought of, but you brought up to me, which was not only the ability to solve the problem, but then the energy to do something about it. Can you talk a bit about that? Because that was quite new to me.
Sure. Let me segue into it a little bit.
Okay.
So far we've been talking about how my research found differences between high deflectors and low deflectors.
Okay.
But there was also some that's what I was looking for. But I also found some things that were interesting, not because my two groups were different, but because there's a lot that this whole group has in common that I believe is indicative of being an entrepreneur.
Okay.
So I'm no longer going to show a split, but I'm going to show what this group have in common. About that. So we have a measure called problem-solving ability.
Okay.
And that's the top graph here. And as you see, this sample is well-developed, even very well-developed, in problem-solving ability.
All right.
Which you would think, which investors would probably look for.
Yep.
It's being shown here.
If there's one thing entrepreneurs are known for, it's coming up with a solution to a problem. So yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Right, yeah. So
would be
I'm kind
what you
of
would
valid
expect.
Corroborating what the word on the street. But what I found is that what we call problem-solving energy is somewhat depleted in this group of people. And every time I'd bring this up, it generated a serious conversation around, wow, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think this is important. One of the participants, I remember talking to him, gave this feedback. And you see here on this chart that the group's problem-solving energy is much more depleted than their ability. So they can do it, but they don't have the energy to do it. And I think that's, first of all, a challenge for the entrepreneurs, and perhaps a signal that this, what I call the myth that prevails in Silicon Valley of work excessively long hours for many, many years to make it happen, comes only at a price. And that price is innovation, creativity, and energy to do what they do.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because I don't know if you've got the slide on the implications for innovation there.
Yeah, I think it's here.
Yeah, there you go. Tell me a little bit more about it, because this was quite a surprise to me, because absolutely the general consensus is that you get a guy and a gal working away in an office or a back room, and they're working 18-hour days for 18 months and living on ramen and noodles. And what you're saying is that this actually is the wrong way to go about it.
I'm saying we pay a price for it.
Okay.
There are probably times when it has to be done.
Yep.
I'm not saying work 30 hours a week and succeed, but I'm saying pay careful attention to the price we pay for that much involvement in work. Because in order to be innovative, in order to be creative, you need to be rested. You need to get out from your tunnel vision, look around, take a deep breath, a long walk, a short vacation, regularly. And yet the word here doesn't honor that. The word is push, push, push. And when I would interview people, they would actually get kind of offended. Well, wait a minute, you said I scored low on innovation, Cliff. I said, well, yes, that's how you answered the assessment. Mm-hmm. And they said, but I'm an innovative person. Look at me, I'm an entrepreneur. And I said, yes, but look what you're doing to yourself. And one fellow said, the day after I gave him this feedback, he said, I went and got 8 hours sleep, and my whole world is different.
So what it really means is that to get the best out of yourself, you need to pace yourself. You can't work 18-hour days.
Or if you do, you need to pause occasionally and restore yourself. There must be a time of restoration if you're going to maintain that creativity.
Okay.
Now, you might argue that, Cliff, creativity is needed in the beginning, and then it's just execution.
Yep.
well, I think there's probably some innovativeness needed in execution too.
Okay.
And we ought to be aware of that.
Okay. That was a really interesting insight to me. I hadn't thought of it at all.
Okay.
And it really makes a difference.
Wasn't what I was
Yeah,
looking for. It popped up, and
Yeah.
it was really a heartfelt part of the conversation with
Yeah.
the people I worked with.
Now, one of the other things that comes up a lot with investors is the candor and honesty of entrepreneurs. There's a great temptation in many cases to tell potential investors what they want to hear. And when that happens, it often comes out in due diligence, if you get that far, that, okay, this person's been sort of kind of gilding the lily or maybe adding a little bit too much colour to things. And that can break the trust that you have to have between the investor and the entrepreneur. So was there anything that you found out there?
Yes, and I just reinforce it. All that I've read by investors and heard them speak in your conferences and things, say that's very, very important to them. Tell me the truth.
Right.
If you hit a wall, if you miss a milestone, don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to but it. Just tell it like it is. And being an academic, I'm also studying the academic literature, which really focuses on a lack of candor in those instances when entrepreneurs don't do it well. Well, we have a measure here of candor. And 18 out of the 19 respondents scored as strong as you can get. Very, very well developed in that. It's also called moral conscience. So to me, it speaks well for the small sample of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs that they take that seriously and will report it seriously.
Okay, that's a very interesting thing because many of those were on a course that we run.
Yes.
And we made it very plain very early on that you are open, you are upfront, you are straight with investors. You don't, if you try to hide or sugarcoat anything or try to make something a little bit better than it is, that you break that trust. And if you've done that, you completely ruin the relationship.
That's right. And it may be that the people I'm working with are those who chose to be involved in your organization. So there might be some self-selection that those who take it seriously, that want to hear what you have to say and are in alignment with what you say, became my sample. So I can't say that all entrepreneurs in the Valley have that strong sense of candor. Right. But I'll say those who are involved in your organization and are doing what it takes to learn it right, they've got it.
Certainly hit those high
almost
standards.
all of them. Yeah,
okay.
95%.
One other thing that you flagged up was about criticism and self. And that was again another very interesting area. Can you expand on that one a little bit?
Sure. The psychology literature is filled with research about what they call self-efficacy, or your belief in your ability to accomplish something.
Right.
Self-confidence, and certainly I hear from investors and other entrepreneurs, and I've heard it from you, that you must project a great deal of self-confidence. You've got to be self-confident to try this. This is hanging it all out there. Here, though, the academic literature often faults overconfidence as a reason for failure. So I'm here on the street, self-confidence is important. You've got to have it. It's a part of resilience. It's a part of perseverance. And I'm hearing academics say, well, this too much belief in yourself is a bad thing. So I wanted to see what that measure is. And I've got it here. So this top scale is what we call the self-side attitude index, or if you score to the left here very strongly, you've got a lot of self-confidence. You believe in yourself, or you have self-efficacy. And here again, 18 out of 19 had a very strong score there. Yet we have another scale that talks about self-criticism, the tendency to be harsh on yourself, the tendency to scrutinize yourself, and people to the left side of that graph tend not to do that. To the right side, they would tend to be very hard. Well, look at the difference. If 18 out of 19 are far on the left in self-side, but this is a self-critical bunch. And the theory is, the idea is, well, you think he's hard on you, you see how hard he is on himself. And that's what this self-criticism is. My experience has been that people who are harshly self-critical tend to diminish their self-side attitude. But that's not happening here. So as one of many people who are trying to figure out what really makes entrepreneurs tick, I'm seeing this combination of a willingness to look very critically at yourself, but still maintain that positive self-confidence. that's rare.
Cool. This is really interesting, because that again is another very important part of what an investor looks for in a startup founder.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to be self-critical, to say, am I the right person to be doing this? Am I adding value to this? Or should we be having somebody else come and do this for me?
Yeah, one of the participants in my research had a strong difference between these two. And I said, what goes on here? He said, Cliff, I know that when I go stand to pitch my business plan to a panel of investors, that they're going to criticize everything that they see that may have a hole in it. And I just want to make sure I've criticized it first.
Okay.
And he could say that with self-confidence,
yep,
without being a braggart, without saying he knows it all, but just knowing that he's done his best to criticize it. And that's it's a paradox. I don't know how to explain why it popped up, but there it is.
Okay. And you've developed a test or a series of tests to enable you to fairly quickly measure this.
All of these measures we
founders.
looked at, in fact, 54 different indices
Right.
measured these and more. I'm just showing you a few highlights that popped into mind as interest.
Right.
And it takes less than 20 minutes to take, but it produces 120 pages of insight. You've taken it. You know
Yes.
how detailed that insight
Yeah.
is. It's hard to grasp. It takes some time to work with it. I can't just give you the test and you'll get it. But in a lengthy conversation with these entrepreneurs, for the most part, they found it very, very insightful about themselves. Because our judgment is something that's kind of a foggy notion. We all know it's important, but we don't really know how it is. Others, be it customers or investors, team members, are looking for it in the entrepreneur, but they too don't know how to put a handle on it. So I'm trying to be the one to put a handle on it.
So is this just an academic exercise to get the PhD, or does this have real application in the real world? And if so, who would it have application for?
Well, it absolutely has application in the real world.
Okay.
I'm one of several thousand consultants who've been using it in the workplace for 40 years now.
Right.
I haven't used it for 40 years, but others have.
Okay.
It was developed in the late 1960s. But most of the use of this kind of an assessment is done in large corporations in leadership development. To my knowledge, I'm the first consultant and academic to try to apply this lens of judgment to startup entrepreneurs who are seeking to found a business that can scale quickly. Most of the published research on entrepreneurs is those who've already gotten successful.
Right.
Well, your judgment is something that's grows. So if you study only successful entrepreneurs, then you don't have a very good window on what does it take to get started. But that's where the risk is. That's where the judgment calls are around who do I invest in have to come in. So I'm trying to say, what can we discern about people at that stage of their career? And if I can help it become clearer to them, all this stuff can be developed. It's not like a personality trait that's fixed. It's like a muscle. If you exercise it, it gets stronger. Well, if you see a deficiency in your judgment, you can practice. You can find a mentor. You can get someone to guide you. You can get a team member to join you and be successful. I really think this will, in time, make a substantial contribution to improving the success rate of startups.
Terrific.
And we need that.
There's been another major project, the startup Genome project, which is trying to gather data from real-life startups going through, and they've got over 3,000 startups have made inputs to it. Is there any correlation between what you're doing and what's happening in startup Genome, or is it?
Well, I think there could be. I've not met those folks. I would love to. I'm jealous of their sample size.
Yeah, they've got a big sample.
They've got something going that I haven't done. And I don't know a lot of their results, but I know their major published result was around the primary cause of startup failure, they said, is premature scaling.
Yes.
And I think that's important insight, but I think it leaves unanswered the question, what's the cause of premature scaling? Well, I say it's judgment. So if we could use something like this process to say, what is it in the judgment of entrepreneurs when they decide to scale prematurely, as opposed to those who decide to scale at the right time, we've got a predictive indicator that could be taught, trained, and developed
Oh, no,
before money is at risk.
Okay, because the the Startup Genome Project said that it's premature scaling in either sales, bring on salespeople too early and not understanding that salespeople are going to take maybe 18 months before they get any sales, and so consequently you've got to pay for them. So it takes the company down that way. Spending too much time developing a major product, so trying to scale the product too quickly. So ways that you suck money out of the business far too fast before you actually get the scale through. Yeah. And that absolutely is a judgment call.
Yeah.
That's no question. I'm going to put those salespeople in place. I'm going to spend more time with the product. That's absolutely a judgment call to do that.
Yeah. So they've identified the action
yes.
that causes success or failure, but I don't know that they've found the judgment behind the action.
Okay.
And I would love to either work with them or figure a way to do that on my own. But that's the sort of thing that this insight can do.
Huh, okay.
And I think probably this premature scaling is the outcome of judgment by investors as well. So insight into investor judgment would be keenly insightful too. I haven't gone there yet.
Okay.
But I think it'd be a fascinating thing to do.
We've only got about a minute to go before we have to wrap up. Do you have any insights for the entrepreneurs watching the show as to what they can do to improve their judgment calls, as it's now being seen to be so important in making the right decisions to be successful?
Yeah, I certainly, Socrates said it, know thyself. So the more you know about yourself, the more effective. Researchers call it metacognition. Cognition is what you know, metacognition is how well you can reflect on what you know. Anything you can do to bring to your own conscious awareness, your own judgment patterns, would be a help.
Are there exercises or things you can do to do that?
Yeah. Well, you can take an assessment if you want to,
okay.
And that'll tell you what exercises do. I mean, if my left arm's atrophied, no sense in exercising my right arm. I need to exercise that arm. So you need to look at your judgment patterns and then decide, okay, what do I want to... In my reports, we've got self-development plans as part of it. I haven't shown them here. But.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd love to get going on. There's much more I'd like to ask about, but we have to wrap up now. So thanks again, Cliff. Great to see you here. And it's good night from me, Chris Gill, and I look forward to seeing you again next month. And we should be wrapped up by now.
Okay, is that good?
That was good.
Thank you so much.
No, not at all. Thank you.